Hello and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be going over 5 ways that I improved my gouache portrait painting. Tip number 1 is to have a good sketch. You want to make sure that you're really happy with your underdrawing and your sketch before you go in with paints. I'm a firm believer that if you don't like your sketch and if you're not happy with it, you're definitely not going to be happy once you put paint over the top of it. If things look like they're weird, then they're going to be even more weird once you put paint on top. Speaking from experience, it's definitely worth the extra effort to go ahead and just dot your I's and cross your T's and make sure that you're really happy with your underdrawing. Even going in and adding in the shadows and the highlights, I like my portraits to look like a topographical map, and it really helps me with my painting process. Tip number 2 is something that might possibly be the most important tip of all. Keep things simple. I like to use a very limited palette. For this particular portrait, I'm actually using the same palette that I used in my previous video. If you want to look at it, go ahead and go check out that video, but all I'm using is Hansa Yellow, Naphthol Red, Ultramarine Blue, in addition to black and white. That's it. I'm not using any fancy colors, just yellow, blue, red, with the addition of black and white, and honestly black is optional. I find that it makes my life a little bit easier, but you don't need anything crazy. Same thing goes with paintbrushes. I am partial to Princeton Selects, but they also happen to be one of the cheaper options out there, and all that you need is like a size number 5 round and like a 1/2 inch flat brush, and that's pretty much what I rely on for every single one of my paintings. Very rarely do I use those tiny little like 5 hair paintbrushes for tiny little details. I just don't use them. I do use a mop or an oval brush just for my first layer of that bright pink color, but otherwise, you don't need anything fancy. Keeping things simple, especially with materials, not only does it make the process a lot easier, there's not as much that you have to focus on, but it also makes the whole process so much more enjoyable. You're able to focus on the process of painting instead of focusing on if you're using the right brush or if you're using the right color here or there, because all that you have are 3 colors to choose from to decide if it's light or dark, and then you can go ahead and if you need to touch it up later, you can. It's no big deal, but it's best to keep things simple in the beginning. Tip number 3. It's very important as well. I think they're all important in their own right, but there is no right or wrong way to paint. Humans have been drawing and painting since the beginning of time. Back then, and same as it is now, it was a form of communication and self-expression. Nothing has changed. By focusing on painting the way that you like to paint, it allows you to really immerse yourself into the whole process of painting from start to finish. You're not caught up on what's right and what's wrong. You're just focusing on what makes you happy in that moment and trying to get the end results that you desire. With gouache in particular, I notice a lot of people either use one of 2 methods. A lot of people go in with a light wash and work their way up to heavier, thicker layers of paints, or some people go in with just solid blocks of color. I like to do a mixture of the both of them. Again, there is no right or wrong way to paint, so with this painting here, I am going in with the tiling method, but as I work the painting up to a finish that I'm happy with, I incorporate other washes on top and other layers on top as well. Especially if it's a value or a color that I'm not particularly happy with, I am not afraid to go over that and blend it in. What's important here is that you're painting in a way that makes you happy. Yes, you absolutely should be trying to paint like the artist that you want to emulate and try and understand how they paint their images, but you don't need to get so caught up into what they do to the point where it doesn't make you happy anymore. So definitely focus on the painting process that makes you happy. There is no cookie cutter, this way's right, that way's wrong method. Absolutely, you can paint or draw or make art in any way that makes you happy. This is something that took me a really long time to learn, and I'm glad that now, after many years of painting, I am finally comfortable with the way that I paint. Tip number 4 is one that personally has really helped me in my process with learning how to paint with gouache: adding in other mediums. I thought that adding colored pencil over my gouache portraits was cheating. I am here to tell you it is not. Absolutely, it is not. With this portrait, for example, I am doing the bulk of it with gouache paint. Towards the end, I do go in with colored pencil, and there's so many reasons for that. First of all, gouache paint, it's really hard to get the color and value you're looking for on the first go. So gouache, it dries really dark for light values, but dark values dry later than you expect. So this is actually a good example right here. This highlight that I'm putting on her upper lip and on her cheek, it's much too cold. I would much prefer like a more yellow color, but it just didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. So later on, I go over with a warm yellow orangey color just to warm it up a bit, and it's not something that I would have been able to do with gouache, mainly because gouache reactivates when you go over it with too many layers, especially a light layer. It's likely going to dry much darker than you anticipate and just not look as good as it could. So there totally is nothing wrong with breaking out your colored pencils, breaking out your microns, your alcohol markers, whatever it may be that helps you to achieve the look that you're going for. I don't think alcohol markers would be the right choice for gouache, but you know what I mean. If you want to get the highlights in the whites of the eyes with a jelly roller, then by all means go ahead and do that. You are not cheating. It does not turn your gouache painting into any less of a gouache painting. It maybe, if anything, makes it a mixed media piece, but even then, I feel like that's kind of a stretch. I would still call this a gouache painting. Personally, I really struggle getting the sharp details without using colored pencil. Not only do I use them to layer over the top of the paint to get the right colors that I'm looking for, but also so that I can get some sharp details. You'll see I go in later on and I get a lot of details in with her eyes and her eyebrows, and it just helps to refine the whole piece and makes your whole process and your whole life a lot easier, if I'm being honest with you. So the final bit of advice that I have for you is to have patience and work through the ugly stages. With this portraits, for example, I did the sketch and the pink wash the evening before, just so that I would have some time for it to dry. Then I went in with the gouache, getting the bulk of the painting done the next day. I ended up picking at it that afternoon with some colored pencils, and overall it took me probably like a day and a half from start to finish. I honestly could go back and nitpick some more, but when I first started with gouache, I thought that it was so incredibly impressive to rush through a painting and be done in 30 minutes. I'd end up hating the artwork in the end and not really understanding why. I very quickly began to appreciate the whole process of creating art and not just the finished piece. So take your time, make sure that you're happy with the brush strokes, the values, the colors that you're putting down. Never rush, and when you do make a mistake, give yourself some grace. At the end of the day, you're only human after all. Gouache can be a very frustrating medium. You're going to have ups and downs, you're going to have ugly pieces here and there. It's inevitable. To me, personally, when I have an ugly painting, I like to think of it as a learning experience. I'm only noticing that it's an ugly painting because I'm improving and my eye is changing and my eye is more refined than it was before. That painting might have been sufficient and I might have been very happy with it 6 months ago, but now I'm noticing so many more mistakes, so many things that I have to change, and I'm only noticing these things because I have put in the work and I'm improving. So whenever you're struggling and you're going through a rough patch with your work, think of it that way. Just as I go back to tip number 4 about using other mediums, I just want you to see how much of a difference these colored pencils have changed this portrait. I mean, it went from okay to significantly better within just a few seconds just because of these colored pencils. They make such a huge difference. Personally, I am super familiar with colored pencils. I've been drawing with them since the beginning of time. They are probably my number 1 all-time favorite medium. So it just comes second nature to me to incorporate them into my paintings, but what a difference. I highly recommend that you use colored pencils with your gouache paintings. Alright, so we're nearing the end of this video. I had so much fun putting this all together for you guys. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any further tips for gouache, then go ahead and add them to the comments. I would love to see everybody's advice for painting with gouache. And I think that that's it for today. I'll see you guys next time.